Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon for our first Market Insights program. The Market Insights program is designed for members and sponsors of ULI and is actually new this year and was designed directly from a response to the survey that we sent out to our members early in the year asking what kind of content they would be interested in hearing from ULI during this time when we can't be meeting in person. And there was a resounding message that folks wanted to hear what was happening in our market. What are some of the trends and insights that professionals are seeing or hearing or thinking about in the coming weeks and months? And so to try to tap into that market, we thought we would turn to some of the professionals that we have in our midst, some of our members and sponsors. And today we have 3 professionals from Gershman Mortgage, or Gershman Investment Corporation, who are going to be sharing their insights and perspectives on where things are headed in the St. Louis market and beyond. Before we get started, you might want to think about marking your calendar for July 16th at noon. That will be our next Market Insights program, and that will feature designers from Canon Design. So July 16th at noon will be the next Market Insights program, and you'll have information coming to you in your inbox as that date gets closer. So to get started this morning, I guess we're actually at noon. To get started this afternoon, we have 3 professionals from Gershman Investment with us this afternoon. We have Tom Gershman, who is a vice president. He has over 12 years of experience working in real estate, including lending, investments, and asset management. Tom focuses on operations as well as originating loans for new construction, substantial rehabilitation, and refinancing of market rate and affordable housing and senior housing. Prior to joining Gershman, Tom worked for Ivanhoe Cambridge, formerly known as Callahan Capital Properties, which is a Chicago-based institutional investor and operator of commercial real estate in major cities across the U.S. While there, the company was one of the largest investors of U.S. commercial real estate, which gave Tom the opportunity to work on acquisitions totaling 4.7 million square feet and $1.5 billion in Chicago, Denver, and New York City. Tom has an MBA in real estate and urban land economics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a BA in communication from the University of Colorado Boulder. Next up, we'll have Adam Hendin, and maybe not in this order, but Adam's joining us today as well. Adam joined Gershman in 2012 and specializes in FHA insured financing of multifamily and healthcare properties. He has completed a variety of new construction and refinances of both market rate and affordable properties that involve historic tax credits, low-income housing tax credits, tax-exempt bonds, and project-based Section 8. Adam works in markets across the country, having closed transactions in 9 states, and takes pride in finding creative solutions to best fit his clients' financing needs. Before joining Gershman, Adam received his BS in mathematics, God bless you, from the University of Missouri and an MBA from WashU here in St. Louis. He's a chartered financial analyst, CFA, and a member of the St. Louis CFA Society. And last but certainly not least, we'll hear from Chris Will. Chris has over a decade of experience with FHA and HUD insured lending with Gershman Mortgage, and Chris has been responsible for the successful preparation of loan requests to HUD involving $1 billion for multifamily and healthcare projects around the nation. Chris specializes in providing financing for all types of apartment properties, senior housing complexes, and healthcare facilities. He's completed numerous complex transactions with multiple layers of soft debt and tax credit equity. He's been involved in various real estate organizations and holds a BS in finance from the University of Missouri, Mizzou. So as you can tell with those lengthy introductions, we do have quite the team of experts here today. So I'm going to take the screen back off and go back to seeing all of our familiar faces here.
That was the easiest.
On the screen. For those of you who haven't muted, I have muted you at the moment. We'll go and hear from our experts. And then towards the end, we'll have time for questions and answers. So if you have questions that you just can't wait to ask, please feel free to use the chat function and we'll save those for the Q&A section. Or you can message me privately if you have any questions or concerns along the way. But at this point, I would like to turn it over to Tom, Adam, and Chris. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Kelly. Hopefully you guys can all hear me okay. This is Tom Gershman here, and I'll give at least a brief introduction to our company and our business, and kind of what we specialize in. So Gershman Investment Corp was founded in 1955 by my grandfather, Solon Gershman, and we also do business as Gershman Mortgage, so no need to apologize for calling us Gershman Mortgage, Kelly. But we have kind of, historically, there's two different companies, Gershman Commercial and Gershman Investment Corp. We're strictly with Gershman Investment Corp, which is a mortgage lender. It has two divisions, one being focused on financing single-family housing, the other, which Chris, Adam, and I all focus on, is providing FHA-insured or HUD loans for multifamily senior housing and healthcare properties across the country. In total, the company has about 250 people. There's about 35 of us that focus in the HUD lending side of the business, which is actually, we've grown substantially over the last, say, 10 or so years. Historically, we've been more kind of regional in the Midwest, but we now have very much of a national presence, including actually a dozen people in our HUD financing department based in a Denver office, as well as a handful of offices in other cities. We have recently, to distinguish the two divisions of our company, one being single-family lending, the other being multifamily and senior housing, we've kind of rebranded the HUD lending division, the multifamily lending, to Gershman Investment Corp., which is our original and legal name, whereas the single-family division is known as Gershman Mortgage. We have found that a niche by focusing on HUD lending has been kind of the most successful model for us. It's a specialty product, requires loan processing and loan application procedures that are different from conventional financing, and so we are almost exclusively dedicated to HUD lending. We do some Fannie and Freddie and the occasional conventional loan on a housing-related project, but almost exclusively HUD lending. We are reaching kind of new levels of volume that we haven't ever seen before. So this fiscal year will exceed $1 billion in loan production for the year. We service all of our HUD loans, so our total loan portfolio is approaching $3 billion, and we'll exceed that number by the end of the year. Our deal size is growing, in part because we're doing more construction lending, which by nature are larger deals than refinances or acquisitions. So we recently closed a couple of the company's largest loans in our history, a $75 million construction to permanent loan on market rate apartments in Austin, Texas, an $85 million refinance of a hospital in Grand Junction, Colorado, which included a new emergency management response system, a new operating room, other upgrades to the facility and equipment. And we actually were able to achieve reduced fees from HUD for that project because it is located in an opportunity zone. And we've recently received a firm commitment for what will now be our largest loan ever, hopefully, assuming it closes, $125 million 300-unit project in Oakland, California. It's a construction to perm loan. And so I figured we could talk at least briefly about our two most active loan programs. One is the 223F refinance or acquisition program. The other is the 221D4 construction to perm program. Chris, do you want to talk about the 223F, or would you like me
That's fine. It's up to you, Tom. I'm happy to step in and do some speaking if you want to give it a break and come back.
Yeah, you've got some strong experience in that area in particular. So why don't you give a quick overview if you don't mind?
Okay. Hi. My name's Chris Will, and I am on the loan originations team at Gershman. And really, there's a few of us here in St. Louis that make up the originations team, and Adam's probably one of the other top originators. I consider myself a top originator. So we work on all the transactions that come in, and really the face to the real estate partners that are owning these deals. So when we talk about doing a 223F loan, it's a refinance, and it's catered towards multifamily. So these are for apartment complexes. Some student housing would fit that criteria, but really family apartments. Could be small affordable projects. It could be large market rate apartments. And what we do is provide long-term, low fixed rate and high leverage government insured loans to these projects. And we've done countless of them around St. Louis, and they are generally very difficult to get through that process compared to just a bank loan where you would be dealing with somebody like a Commerce Bank or something like that. But again, you get better than market terms, and so a lot of borrowers are looking for us to do those loans for their projects, especially larger loans, and where higher leverage is what they're looking for.
Thank you, Chris. So a couple other noteworthy items. Our interest rates are typically lower than kind of the rest of the market because we have the loans are federally insured, and so that provides a credit enhancement, which we sell all of our loans. While we service, all HUD lenders sell all of their loans. We retain loans for the life of the loan, but because of the credit enhancement that the federal government provides by insuring the loan, we're able to achieve lower interest rates than kind of the marketplace overall. So, for example, for the 223F program that Chris referenced, our rates are about 2.25% for 35 years fixed rate. A couple other items or at least one other item worth mentioning related to the 223F loan is HUD has always had historically a requirement where a property has to be, a more recently constructed property has to be seasoned for 3 years, or it has to be at least 3 years since receiving its last certificate of occupancy before it can apply for a HUD loan. And HUD has done away with that requirement and instead has I believe it's a 90-day stabilization requirement. So 3 months of stabilization, they will then consider a loan application at that point. So that's really opened up some new opportunities for apartment and senior housing owners to utilize HUD financing when they may not have been able to previously. I know Adam Hendin's on. He was having some internet issues, and so he's called in. Adam, do you want to talk about the 221D4 loan program, which is our construction loan program? Or would you like
fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. So to give everyone an overview, the D4 program is, as Tom described, a construction of perm loan. So it's typically structured as a interest-only construction loan during the construction period that automatically converts into a 40-year fully amortizing loan. There are a lot of really obvious advantages for using D4 construction financing, and those advantages kind of become even more highlighted during different credit cycle periods. So we're kind of entering one of those right now in which, traditional bank financing is not as aggressive as they have been the last couple of years. So while they kind of shrink their footprint, the HUD program more or less stays the same, in such that, you know, its competitive advantage is greater during different market cycles. And, you know, we kind of had one of those in, you know, 2010 for a little bit, and I think now we're kind of entering into a similar situation. But the general terms are, it's a, you know, high leverage fixed rate loan. So you can go up to 85% loan to cost. It's non-recourse on both the construction and the perm side. And then you also get to lock your rates when you start construction, so you're locked in for 42 plus years. So it really does mitigate a lot of the major risks when doing a new construction loan. You know, obviously the risk is reduced when you have non-recourse construction. And then there's also a huge risk reduction in the fact that you have your interest rate locked in for the perm conversion, and there is no, it automatically converts, and there's no, you know, resizing of the loan, the rate at that point in time. You know, high leverage matters quite a bit for a lot of the developers, and, you know, the fact that you can get both, you know, long-term, low rate, non-recourse, and high leverage is usually a really nice fit. You know, D4 deals are not easy to get done. There are significant challenges with them in terms of timing, and sometimes, depending on the market, prevailing wage costs can really throw a wrench into the deal. In addition, you know, HUD has a lot of rules, particularly environmental regulations, that have to be dealt with that a normal, you know, bank financed property doesn't have to. And so depending on the deal and kind of how far along it is, D4 financing may or may not be a good fit. But for, you know, a lot of developers that, you know, are patient and, you know, have the time to get one done, you know, you'd be hard to argue for, you know, better financing product under the circumstances. You know, rates today for a D4 are probably all in the neighborhood of, you know, 3% plus mortgage insurance premium of, you know, anywhere from 2.5 to 25 to 60 bips. There is a big incentive that's been going on within the D4 program for a couple of years, which actually reduces the mortgage insurance premium paid to HUD if projects go green and are built more energy efficient. So most of the new construction projects that get built with HUD these days figure out a way to achieve energy efficiency and get the benefit of the reduced rate, and obviously get the benefit of having a, you know, lower energy efficient footprint. So it's a great program, and I think that probably sums most of it up, Tom. So I'll probably turn it back to you, and if people have questions later, happy to dig in more to the details.
Thanks, Adam and Chris. Yeah, I mean, a couple other notable items, and this applies to both loan programs, is that HUD basically reduces loan costs in order to not only incentivize green certification or energy efficiency, but also affordability. So there's a common misconception that HUD only finances or gets involved in affordable projects. And while HUD certainly or affordable projects make up a substantial segment of the business that both we and as lender and HUD as the kind of backer of the loan make up, we do plenty of market rate financing. I mean, there are certain things HUD doesn't get involved in. For example, student housing, they won't finance. One recent change that is probably more due to the economic circumstances today is HUD will typically finance like a complex of rental homes, so single-family homes that are for rent as long as they're contiguous or at least close enough to one another. But HUD is at least temporarily suspended that lending program. But, you know, HUD also incentivizes not only affordability but projects in opportunity zones. HUD has put some incentives in place to provide for developers to achieve some advantages should they choose to develop a project in an opportunity zone. You know, and Adam alluded to, you know, a lot of the more conventional lenders, banks in particular, but also CMBS lenders, life insurance companies. While you're maybe starting to see them, you know, come back a bit more, HUD's pipeline is full as it's ever been, and as is ours, because, you know, a number of the competitors, like those types of lenders I just mentioned, are on the sidelines or are just not as aggressive in the terms that they'll offer today. You know, recent market volatility had caused HUD interest rate spreads to widen for a short period of time because some investors that buy the HUD loans were kind of freezing and pulling out of the market temporarily. They're all back, and so our spreads are back down, but you're still the kind of investor end of the debt market impact the availability of capital, in particular for other types of lenders, probably most notably CMBS or commercial mortgage-backed securities lenders. You know, we're obviously in unique circumstances today with the global pandemic and resulting economic crisis. You know, some recent changes due to those circumstances that we've seen are, you know, HUD requiring increased capital reserves. There's, you know, maybe more of a focus on a developer's experience. Like I mentioned, HUD has suspended lending on single-family rental houses. Additionally, in part due to the CARES Act, but also just some other measures that HUD has put in place, is they're providing greater relief to existing borrowers that are impacted financially by COVID-19 or indirectly due to the economic impacts of COVID-19. So a few examples of those are HUD will suspend reserve deposits that are required monthly. They may allow borrowers to pay their mortgage out of their existing reserve accounts. And kind of a last resort, well, the very last resort is obviously defaulting on the loan, but HUD is providing forbearance, which is basically a suspension of mortgage payments temporarily for those borrowers that have been most impacted by COVID-19. And the nature that we've seen of you know, because we service over $2 billion in HUD loans currently, and that, you know, we continue to add to our servicing portfolio. I'd say within multifamily, so our apartment loans, not our senior housing loans, the Section 42 or low-income housing tax credit projects have been probably most impacted due to just heavy concentrations of tenants that work in service industries or other industries that have been most impacted by COVID. The market rate projects have fared okay relatively as far as we've seen, I think in part due to you know, government stimulus payments, and so we'll see what happens if and when the stimulus dries up. You know, we do have a number of loans on Section 8 properties, but if a tenant experiences a loss of income, a Section 8 tenant experiences a loss of income, HUD, that's part of the Section 8 program, is HUD steps in to reduce their rent and kind of covers the balance. And then on the healthcare side, the senior housing facilities with, you know, substantial COVID outbreaks have obviously been most impacted due to two things: resident deaths, and in those instances, in a lot of cases, those facilities are they have to suspend admissions of new residents, so they can't allow, while they may have residents electing to leave or God forbid dying, they're not able to then kind of backfill those vacant units because they have government-imposed suspensions of new admissions. So that's kind of it as far as our overview of the HUD lending programs and recent trends, kind of specific to our specialization. I thought it might be interesting for us to highlight a few of our projects, both in the St. Louis area and maybe one or two outside of St. Louis that might be of interest. Chris or Adam, do either of you want to start with one of the more interesting projects that you guys have worked on recently?
Hey, this is Adam. I can talk about one real quick. It's actually not in St. Louis, but it's in downtown Kansas City. I'm sure people, probably are somewhat familiar with that market. But Gershman financed a project called Second and Delaware, which is downtown in the River Market. It was a pretty interesting project. It was about 276 units, and it was designed as a passive house energy concept, and it's the largest passive house development, I believe, in the country. And for those of you that are not familiar with it, it's basically a big concrete block, and you have 6 inches of concrete by 4 inches of foam by another 4 inches of concrete that basically is the shell of the entire building. And so it's probably one of the most energy efficient apartment buildings that's ever been built. In addition to that, it kind of has solar panels on our roof, but it was a pretty cool project, and Gershman got involved in it because it was originally financed by someone else, and the contractor had trouble and basically walked off of the job midway through the project. And Gershman was able to basically come to the table, restart the deal halfway through construction, upsize the loan, and the developers, interestingly, were able to raise additional equity by committing to pay some of that equity back through collecting on the payment performance bond from the previously defunct contractor. So it was a really interesting project that kind of had to come together and had some false starts to it, but it's basically done at this point with construction and probably to the point where they're starting to do some pre-leasing. So it's a really cool project, and if any of you guys are ever in Kansas City, I would check it out. You really can't miss it, particularly if you're coming from the airport and driving downtown. I mean, it's this really beautiful big project that kind of sits right on the river market. But that was a really high-end market rate development, and it's done with the 221 D4 loan.
Thanks, Adam. I'll highlight a couple of projects I've worked on recently. So one is currently in lease-up. It's located in University City, and it's called Hawthorne Apartments. It's a former school designed by William Ittner, who designed numerous schools in the St. Louis area and Central Corridor of St. Louis. Nathaniel Hawthorne School was the name of it. It was a University City public elementary school, closed maybe 10 or so years ago, and sat vacant for a number of years. There was at least one group that attempted to develop affordable housing, rehabilitate the building into affordable housing, which University City was not in favor of. Ultimately, a client of mine ended up developing it into market rate housing, as well as adding some new construction as it had some kind of additional land on the site. This is, by the way, located basically on Hanley Road, just north of Olive Boulevard. And the end result is the school building has been rehabilitated into about 37 market rate apartments. Very, every apartment's different. No real product quite like it in the University City area. And then there's 10 new construction townhomes on the site as well. And lease up has been strong. It's a modest sized project, so there's not a ton of units to lease up, but even under the circumstances, it's been leasing up well. Another project with which I don't want to jinx because we've received a loan commitment. It's set to close within the next few weeks, and then construction will commence. It's located at 18th and Locust. It was originally a Weber Chevrolet, 100 plus years ago, and most recently it was a tire warehouse. But developer acquired the property to rehab it into using historic tax credits into market rate apartments as well, kind of loft apartments, which you see a lot of in downtown St. Louis. HUD had, frankly, some heartburn related to some risk that they viewed as far as demand for this project. But the fact that it was in an opportunity zone basically offset the risk that HUD perceived related to demand for the project. So HUD, we were able to kind of get HUD on board with the project, and frankly, the opportunity zone really kind of won the day. I don't think we could have gotten that project approved had it not been in an opportunity zone. So this is an example of a project that probably no other lender would have touched, and HUD only went for it because it's located in an opportunity zone. And HUD has received a mandate from the top down to, encourage development in opportunity zones. So that's what we're doing here. HUD's pipeline of construction deals remains very strong, both in St. Louis and in the metro area and nationally. I think that's in part because, a lot of the banks, which are the typical, construction lender of choice, have pulled back quite a bit, but also because the construction boom has not really slowed down just yet. I think we expect it to, based on what's going on, economically. But these construction projects take so much time. Any deal that was anywhere near closing was well in process before COVID and the resulting impacts hit. And so those projects are still moving forward. HUD may have some additional reserves that they might require due to the current circumstances, but they're continuing to lend actively, and that's kind of what our role is as a HUD lender, and HUD's role is to continue to provide capital to the marketplace while other lenders are maybe less active or might be out of the market altogether. Chris, are there any projects you want to touch on, or any kind of notable deals in St. Louis?
Yeah, I can give some. I'd rather give some thoughts. I've got some deals that probably don't really want to get into too deep a discussion about, just because I've got them on the doorstep of closing and not ready to release all the details about them yet. But I can give some thoughts about what I see and what's going on. As you mentioned, and especially with where we can lock HUD rates today, really being the lowest. In fact, we locked one recently, last week, the lowest refinance rate we've ever locked. So that tells you where rates are right now. Historic lows. We see a lot of activity. We've got a lot of borrowers that are doing refinancing, and with refinancing obviously comes, kind of restructuring how their property is with different repairs or reserves that they want to put up so that they can preserve that project for a long time. As you know, multifamily has been a strong asset class for quite some time now, and we see more and more interest from. Sorry about that. I had a call coming in. We have, people that historically have built multifamily that are very interested in building more multifamily. We also have folks that either were industrial or office or retail builders that are now building multifamily as well, because again, multifamily has really been kind of the golden goose over the last 10 or 15 years. So, our new construction pipeline is also as full as it's ever been. Tom mentioned that we've been closing some very large loans, and I think that's due to the fact that a lot of these apartment complexes are just getting bigger and bigger with more amenities, and you continue to see demand for luxury Class A urban infill type of sites that the ground costs a lot of money, and it takes a lot of people getting involved in order to get the zoning right and to get the really to get the whole project developed. We've seen a lot of mixed use where former sites that maybe used to have shopping malls and shopping centers, and one of those being Chesterfield Mall now being up for redevelopment. We see that around the country. That's not just here in St. Louis. We see that all over where former vacant shopping malls or very low occupancy malls are being repurposed, and people are using FHA to do that. Now it's a cumbersome process and it's tricky, but that's why people like us are around to try and coach the developers through that process. But I'd say the low interest rate environment, the fact that multifamily has been very strong, the fact that people are willing to pay top dollar to rent an apartment rather than go buy a house because they get convenience and amenities, we continue to see a lot of success with multifamily. And quite honestly, we think we're going to continue to see that regardless of the COVID outcome. Maybe there'll be some downward pressure on occupancy or rents, but I would not expect that to last more than, potentially the next 12 months or so, even that being a stretch. So that's pretty much all I had, Tom. If you had any other questions for me, that's fine, or else go ahead with your presentation.
Yeah, so I that's basically the script that we had kind of prepared for today. Thank you, Kelly, for the opportunity to discuss with the group today, and we're happy to discuss any particular projects that we've worked on that people might know about, or industry trends, or really any questions, topics that people might be interested in. While we are kind of housing specialists, might be able to speak to other property types as well. So I'd say we're happy to answer any questions, and I can continue to generate questions for my colleagues if you guys don't have any.
Sounds great. I really appreciate the information you guys have shared about the scope of the work that you guys do here in St. Louis and around the region, and then also to hear your perspectives on where you think things are going. I think that's really insightful for the group that we've assembled here today. We do have a question. I think, Dale, you had something that you wanted to pose. I will take you off mute and you can ask the question yourself.
Okay, good. I actually submitted a couple to you, Kelly, so that's fine. Do you, Gershman, handle, or tell me how you handle mixed-use projects that don't have the three main complement of multifamily, senior living, and healthcare type projects, attributes in your projects. Let's say it has commercial, retail, hospitality, those types of other market and uses. Do you get involved in and do you do a portion? Do you bring in other financing mechanisms? And maybe on the tail of that, in certain cases, where do you take advantage of partners that can bring tax exempt financing to a project to make it stronger?
Well, I'll touch on the first part of that question. So if the project doesn't have any sort of apartment, senior housing, or healthcare use, then we're unable to lend on it as a HUD lender. Though while there is some kind of leniency, we can call it, there has to be a use that at least falls under HUD's mission in order for HUD to, accept a loan application and proceed to have the project insured by the FHA. Adam or Chris, do either of you want to speak to the scenario where, we finance potentially a portion of a mixed-use project that it does include, a use that we can finance?
Yeah, I can talk to that. This is Adam. There's a couple of examples that I can speak to. So first, in St. Louis, a really good example of this is the Laurel, which is a downtown on Wash Ave apartments that was, I think, financed by Gershman in 2010. This, for any of you guys that have been in there, is basically a apartment on top of a hotel. And the way that deal was structured was a condominium, such that Gershman financed the apartments up top with a D4, and then private financing came and did the hotel. So that's a pretty unique situation, but because there was so much of the project that was deemed commercial, there was really no other option to do it. Recently, I've also done a project that was actually in Omaha that was kind of a more traditional, mixed use. It was, kind of first floor, street level retail with apartments, behind and on top. And in that case, we were actually able to finance the entire thing through the HUD loan. Roughly speaking, the majority of the project still has to be residential. And so, only about 20% of the income and space can come from the non-residential commercial portions, and that's allowed to be financed. So, that's a pretty easy deal to do, as long as you have occupied tenants. But in the event that you have a truly mixed-use project with, a large portion of commercial retail, you might have to kind of condo that out and finance it separately. And I think your second question, Dale, was about tax increment financing or tax exempt financing.
Tax exempt financing in consideration of the advantages there, 501c3 related, and how do you handle that if it comes across your desk or is needed in a project? And that usually I think I can answer that. So there are obviously various different kinds of tax incentives that developers can bring to the project. Tax exempt financing is one of them, and I don't know how familiar you or anyone else is with low-income housing tax credits, but if you ever do a 4% low-income housing tax credit deal, you're actually required by the tax code to finance your project with tax exempt money. But the interesting thing about that is that you think it's an advantage. In today's world, it's not necessarily an advantage. D4 new construction rates are actually lower as a taxable rate than a tax-exempt bond finance project. So even when there are mandates not to do tax-exempt financing through these low-income housing tax credit deals, there is a structure in place that probably seems counterintuitive that actually kind of works around the tax-exempt financing in order for the developer to benefit from the lower cost D4 taxable exempt financing. So, there's all kinds of incentives that you can look at, but interestingly enough, tax-exempt financing doesn't necessarily benefit the project as much as you might think.
Thank you.
I think we also had a question from Russ Thompson. Russ, do you want to ask your question?
Certainly. Thanks, Kelly. Tom, I was wondering if you see interest in development dropping off with I'll call it the COVID economy, or is there still plenty of demand driven by these interest rates?
So it's frankly a little bit tough to answer that question because, there's nobody tracking data on necessarily on preliminary proposed developments. A lot of that stuff's kind of kept out of the public and out of those that kind of research and track this information for the industry. But from our perspective, we're continuing to see very strong interest in new development despite the current COVID environment and the economic impacts, unemployment. I think you have to attribute some of that to the fact that the banks are not as active as they were in financing construction. And if they are, they're not offering as aggressive loan terms as they were prior to COVID. Whereas we don't have those challenges. We don't have, HUD doesn't have, limits on volume or floors on interest rates or things like that that are impacting the economics of our loans like other lenders are being impacted. And so I think, we're seeing very strong demand in particular, both on the development and refinancing. But in particular for development because, we're not the only game in town, but there are fewer games in town than there were, and our game offers as strong as economics as really we ever have, whereas the competition has kind of moved in the other direction for the most part, at least. And so, we haven't seen a slowdown. And in fact, I've received more cold calls to me of developers interested in HUD loans. Maybe they've done a HUD loan before. Maybe they've never done one. Maybe if they did one, it's been a long time and they've been financing with banks, since their last HUD loan 10 years ago or something. But we're starting to see kind of business that wasn't necessarily coming to HUD come to us now. So, we probably have a little bit of a different view than other types of lenders who have been impacted more by and maybe become less competitive due to COVID.
Tom, just a quick follow-up. Multifamily seems to have exploded the last few years in St. Louis and probably across the country. There's a limit on entry-level housing. Do you think we're reaching a saturation level there, or we still seem to see new developments coming pretty fast?
Chris or Adam, either you want to chime in here? I'm happy to answer, but.
Go ahead, Tom.
Okay. Yeah, we're not seeing a slowdown. I mean, demand for apartments remains strong, and maybe that's because people are still receiving stimulus money. So we haven't seen that dry up yet, which, so there may be a lag in an impact to, the apartment sector. But at the same time, I mean, people's, 401ks have been hit. People that have had money invested in the equities markets have been hit. People may not have the money to buy homes like they once had, and we haven't. While I'm not focused on single family housing, as a company, we haven't seen a slowdown in single family purchasing. We maybe saw a brief slowdown kind of while things were really shut down, but single family home purchases are back active. Affordability may become more of a challenge as we kind of get further into this situation that we're in. But at the moment, the apartment market seems strong, and I think if anything, you might start to see single family slow down, which often acts or kind of behaves opposite to apartments. And so I think there's a good chance, if we see single family, purchasing slow down, you're not going to see apartments, the demand for apartments slow down. You might actually see it increase. But again, affordability, is always going to be, may become more of an issue. You may see rents flatten out or drop. But overall, we're not seeing kind of a general slowdown in the apartment sector, at least not yet.
Thank you.
Along the same lines of multifamily housing, we have a question from Eric Wood. If I don't get this all the way right, please jump in and correct me. But Eric asks, with regard to 5G, I just lost it. Where did it go? There we go. How are you guys addressing 5G, or what are you seeing being addressed regarding 5G infrastructure in the developments? Are you seeing a possible premium in rent or sales for providing 5G in the current market?
Chris or Adam, frankly, I haven't seen it come up yet, but I don't know, Adam, you're probably doing more construction financing than I am right now. Are you seeing that as a topic?
No, not at all. Maybe it's just not being brought to my attention, but I have not seen or heard of it in really any single development that I've looked at recently.
Yeah, I can echo that too. There's been no talk that I've been aware of.
Good to know. Well, thank you for that. Christy, I think Christy you had a question. Would you like to chime in? I'll unmute you.
Sorry, I was struggling with the unmute button. Thanks, Kelly. So we spoke a lot today about multifamily and understanding that activity there has been strong, and probably that's a sector that has been less impacted by the current COVID environment. What are you guys seeing much activity in the senior housing space today? And if so, what does that look like? And maybe more specifically, does HUD have a viewpoint on senior housing, given that that industry has been pretty severely impacted by COVID, and maybe even longer term questioning of just changes within that industry and product type?
I can speak to that a little bit. I'll admit, we do a fair amount of senior housing business, but it makes up, less of our business than multifamily, apartments, whether they be market rate or affordable. But we have seen, HUD has kind of tightened up their underwriting parameters related to senior housing. I'd say the bigger impact we've seen that's in turn impacting HUD financing for senior housing is all HUD lenders, like I said, securitize and sell the HUD loans to primarily to Wall Street investors, sometimes to unions. But the Wall Street investors have really pulled back. Some are not acquiring loans on senior housing at all right now. And so those that are left buying those loans, are not offering as aggressive pricing because there's much less competition from, the typical pool of buyers of those loans. And so therefore, interest rate spreads have increased on senior housing projects. One interesting trend that has come up, I'm working on it's kind of borderline multifamily senior housing. It's an independent living project, so there's no healthcare component to it, but there's certain amenities that are geared towards elderly, and each apartment has to have a head of household that's at least 62 years of age in this particular program. But I was talking to the developer when this stuff, when the pandemic was first starting up, just to make sure, he was kind of still interested in moving forward, and, we're incurring costs of third-party reports, things like that. And his view is that, so his project, it's independent living only. In recent years, there's been a trend for senior projects to move towards a continuum of care model, where they offer, independent living, assisted living, memory care, skilled nursing, various levels of healthcare. And this developer's belief is that you're going to start to see a trend to go away from those kind of mixtures of different levels of care because of the pandemic. Effectively,
I think we all lost you. But I think what we might do, we're coming up on 1 o'clock, and I think what we might be able to do is just kind of capture that last thought that Tom had and send it out in a follow-up email to everybody who is on the call today. I want to thank Tom and Chris and Adam for spending an hour with us and sharing their insights. I'm sorry we lost you there, Tom. I know you're trying to fix it. But I think this was really insightful and a great chance for us to hear directly from people who are right in the midst of what's happening in our market, to find out what their thoughts are, what they're hearing in the market, and what they're hearing from other professionals out there. So thank you all for joining us again this afternoon. We will have information coming out about the next Market Insights program on July 16th, probably in the next week or so. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to send them directly to me, Kelly Annis at ULI. And I think that might be it for today. I wish you all a warm and happy and safe, or maybe cool. We're back in summer. Have a cool afternoon, and we will catch you guys in July. Thanks so much. Take care.